Hey y'all, my name's Leah Yearty, and today I'm going to be discussing highly pathogenic avian influenza and a variety of factors associated with the disease. So, highly pathogenic avian influenza, or HPAI, is a virus currently plaguing global populations. The disease, along with the looming risk of outbreaks, has recently caused some great distress in the commercial sector. The dynamic mode of transmission, high mortality rate, and prevalence in a variety of regions have made the disease impossible to control and dangerous to the health and safety of not only birds, but also the human population. But what is HPAI? I'm sure many people have heard the term bird flu, which is the colloquial saying for HPAI. The virus is a member of the Orthomyxoviridae family and is principally composed of subtypes H5 and H7, though there have been 16H and 9N distinct subtype versions discovered so far. HPAI is an influenza type A virus, and its genome is a negative single-stranded RNA molecule. The virus is associated with a high mortality rate, and its reservoir species is generally regarded as waterfowl. HPAI is shed mainly by wild birds through saliva, nasal secretions, and feces. Birds in the same group or population are susceptible to all of these factors, but the main risk is contaminated water sources. There is a distinct link between HPAI outbreaks and migration behavior. Cases typically spike around fall and spring in the U.S. As wild birds migrate across entire regions or countries, they stop to eat and drink at shared water sources. We all know that birds defecate seemingly at random as they fly by, so when feces enter water sources, the virus can spread to populations that would otherwise never meet face to face. The infection enters through the respiratory or digestive tract, and symptoms progress from there. So, what happens after infection? There are multiple versions of avian influenza. LPAI is low pathogenic avian influenza, and it's fairly endemic to poultry. I wanted to include some information on LPAI symptoms to give a scope of how severe the HPAI virus is. LPAI is associated with much milder symptoms, and many animals remain asymptomatic. The most common marker is a drop in egg production for commercial producers. Wild and domestic birds are also noted as eating less, appearing ruffled, and exhibiting respiratory symptoms like coughing and sneezing. LPAI is not nearly as deadly, but there is a risk of low pathogenic to high pathogenic conversion in commercial facilities. On the other hand, HPAI has much more severe symptoms. Symptoms are much of the same as LPAI, along with the lack of coordination, diarrhea, sudden death, and a few others. Obviously, HPAI is a greater risk to bird populations due to its increased pathogenicity and severe symptoms. As I mentioned, wild birds are the main reservoir and carrier for HPAI. A large variety of species can catch versions of the virus, but orders Enceriformes and Charadriiformes are the common natural hosts. Enceriformes comprises ducks, geese, swans, and the like, while Charadriiformes encompasses gulls and surfbirds. You can see that all of these share at least semi-aquatic habitats, and many make long migrations. Their habits contribute to transmission through contaminated water as well as migratory link spreading through regions. 15 of the mentioned H and all 9 N subtypes have been isolated from wild waterfowl. If you see at the bottom of this slide, in a bit over a year of collection, H5N1 was detected in over 7,000 wild birds in all 50 states in the U.S. Prevalence in every state is more concerning to me than the large number, as it shows how versatile and far-reaching this virus is, and what a danger it poses to domestic and commercial operations. Leading right into the next topic, the risk that HPAI poses to commercial farming is quite severe. In the U.S., we have roughly 368 million egg-laying chickens, 9.5 billion broiler chickens, and 208 million turkeys. These are astoundingly large numbers, and the nature of poultry farming being large facilities with lots of birds housed together only increases the risk of infection and transmission. The H5 and H7 subtypes can cause 90 to 100% mortality in chickens. This is a very severe statistic for a producer, especially with little separation between birds or waste. There is evidence that free-range production styles have a greater risk, due to being less sheltered and more open to the elements and wild birds flying overhead. Some other management practices that have an influence on HPAI transmission include lessening the cycle length to allow less time for infection to begin or proceed. Cage-style facilities have a lower risk of initial infection, but the close quarters can increase transmission rates if an infection enters. As I mentioned earlier, LPAI is not uncommon in facilities and has relatively low-risk symptoms. The real issue is a mutation or conversion event into HPAI. Speaking of, since 1959, there have been 127 recorded reassortments of the virus and 39 low pathogenic to high pathogenic conversions. These conversions occurred mainly in Europe and principally in commercial production facilities in high-income countries. The reassortments occurred in Asia mostly. In January 2022 to June 2023, HPAI was detected in 800 commercial and backyard flocks in 47 states. This is from the same study as the wild bird statistic earlier, and their range across the U.S. is reflected in the domestic statistics as well. Wild birds are the common host, and domestic poultry pose the greatest risk to humans, but zoo and captive wildlife are also affected by HPAI. Facilities have to implement new safety protocols like sterilizing boots, bleach baths, and building covers for water and food sources. The issue here is not only the money spent to protect these animals, but also the loss of the educational impact for the public when these animals are quarantined or sheltered. I'm sure many of you are familiar with Bear Hollow Zoo, and I've interned and volunteered there for a few years and seen the effect tightening HPAI protocols have had on animals, zookeepers, and the public. Many animals are taken out of the public view for protection, and lots of time and money are spent trying to ensure the safest practices. I have a list of protocols and a few pictures to show some of these changes. Here's a list of protocols if you'd like to pause and read through, but I will be highlighting the big ones with photos. First, I have some examples of covered holdings that have been modified or built to quarantine at-risk birds. This is an owl holding, and you can see Zephyr on the right in her box. The notable features are the lip on the roof to ensure no outside waste is getting in the enclosure, as well as the two-door entrance system. Here you can see another example of a covered enclosure with a clear skylight window on the roof. This ensures the birds will get proper exposure to the sun while still staying protected. This slide shows the bleach foot baths and cleaning supplies at a variety of enclosures. As you can see, they're all located right at the entrance to ensure disinfection. The foot baths are changed daily at the end of the routine, and the spray bottles all have bleach solution to clean every feeding and watering surface daily. This is Hanaya, the bald eagle. She's such a large bird that a fully sheltered quarantine isn't feasible, but you can see the covers at a variety of places in her enclosure. These all cover her feeding platforms and water ponds. There's also netting above to keep birds from entering. Lastly, here are a few other owl enclosures that have coverings over their entire surface area. As you can see, the folks at the zoo put in a lot of work to make sure these birds are safe, and protocol is followed rigidly. Still, many of these birds are moved out of the public view for safety, which does diminish the zoo's educational impact. Many of these protocols are not precisely applicable for commercial poultry, but the general principles of sterilizing objects and providing covering for animals can be applied to an industrial facility or a backyard flock. So, back to the slides. I'm sure many of you are wondering what this disease means for humans. Both bird-to-human and human-to-human transmission are possible, but are not common, yet. There have been some small outbreaks, typically among families with flocks, but these outbreaks are small and contained, and it's rarely clear whether human-to-human transmission even occurred. In studies where human volunteers are infected, a large range of symptoms have been observed, from conjunctivitis to respiratory distress syndrome. These symptoms are often hard to differentiate from other influenzas, like the human seasonal flu, but not a large number of human cases have been recorded. Though there's not a current human disease issue, a paper I read clearly states that the pandemic potential should not be underestimated. The bigger threat to humans than zoonotic transmission is domestic poultry dying in large numbers, either commercial or backyard flocks. In an outbreak in 2003 in Vietnam, smallholder farm production was reduced by 57%. This had devastating effects on income and nutrition when meat and egg supply was diminished so greatly. If you remember the staggering statistics from a few slides ago, the U.S. has a very large number of chickens and turkeys, and our food supply would take a major hit from a sustained outbreak. Unfortunately, the high costs make safety measures hard to implement properly, so for now, the risk will remain. In conclusion, HPAI is a serious issue all over the world. Our best hope to contain the virus are rigid safety protocols in all facilities, including many of the options I covered. A vaccination campaign has been discussed, but due to the quick turnover and sheer number of birds, it would be difficult to implement in a commercial facility. Wild birds would be even more difficult to contain and vaccinate in significant numbers. What can you do with your own flock? Make sure they have proper shelter and coverings, especially over food and water. Also, teach your flock stranger danger. Don't let them socialize with wild birds, especially waterfowl. This disease should and will continue to be closely monitored for all of our health and safety. Thanks for watching, y'all. I hope you learned a little something about HPAI. Here are the references I used for the project if anyone has any further questions to examine.